This morning, we heard disturbing news from the UN Assistant Mission for Iraq, Martin Kobler. Martin Kobler made a pronouncement today. He told the residents of Camp Ashraf that they must accept Iraq's rule, that all of them need to be relocated to unknown locations without letting the UN High Commissioner on Refugees continue with his mission to interview and identify them as refugees. This is not only backwards because it perverts the very mission of the UN, it's disturbing for the United States, who guaranteed the protection of these residents and who is about to welcome the leader of Iraq at the White House on December 12th.
Fascinating. In the hopes that you're going to send this tape over to the White House and the Department of State, take a look at the letter that the Iraqi government has sent to the European Commission. And in this very letter, at the top of the list, it says, the organization has already been classified by the international community as a terrorist organization. There's only one reason it's there. We helped this government put it there. I had occasion to be talking to the UN High Commissioner on Refugees about 2 weeks ago. He expressed grave disappointment and frustration with the Maliki government. But I must tell you, and I'm going to look at this through a third lens, he expressed frustration, perhaps even surprise, with the United States and its failure to act, because the continued designation has frustrated their limited efforts, because they know even if they get access, and so far the Iraqi government has denied them access. We pointed out today, Patrick Kennedy pointed out to you, even today, Martin Kleber was told that you got to move by the Iraqi government, you must move these men and women to another location in Iraq. Beginning to wonder why we are so docile, why we are so submissive, why we are letting this administration, for whom we've sacrificed thousands of lives, and that's far more important than the treasure, but significant treasure, to tell us what to do consistent with our broader moral obligation to support humanitarian human rights and to keep our promise, which we gave individually to every member of Camp Ashraf, when we also guaranteed them protections under the Geneva Convention. That's the other interesting piece of interesting revelation over the past several days. Not only does the Iraqi government say they are going to continue to do and treat them as a terrorist organization, but they said they are not protected by the Geneva Convention. Maliki is coming to this country on December 12th. And I really hope this tape gets to the White House. The State Department issues visas, and the Department of Homeland Security, although the visa has been issued, has the right to deny you access into this country. It's an interesting juxtaposition. One issues the visa, and the other opens the door and lets you in. Well, I've got an idea. Let's set a couple conditions before we open the door. How about delisting the MEK? Oh, I appreciate that, but there's a lot more. We're going to delist. We're going to insist that they cooperate with UN High Commissioner on Refugees. We're going to insist that the initial interviews take place in Camp Ashraf. We're going to insist that the United Nations provide security for both the UN High Commissioner and his team, as well as the residents of Camp Ashraf.
I generally think the United Nations is an institution that's important in the world, and I think it's a mistake to defund them. But yesterday, the person who is representing the United Nations made the ridiculous suggestion that the people from Ashraf be redistributed inside Iraq, and that somehow, without any guarantee of protection either from the United States or the United Nations, they would be fine. How can I go to the Congress of the United States and ask them to restore the money for the United Nations if this kind of cowardly policy is what we get in return from the United Nations? We can do better than this, and I ask the representatives of the United Nations to think about what they are doing. We expect, in return for our investment in the United Nations, we expect courage. And we have seen virtually none of it from the UN in protecting these 3,500 individuals in Ashraf who have written guarantees, every single one of them, from the United States government that we would protect them, and who have been screened by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's anti-terrorist squad, and not one of them has been found to have terrorist connections. Explain to me, Martin Kobler, what rationale you give for what you have done, which is essentially to sign the execution okay for 3,500 unarmed civilians. That is not what the United Nations is supposed to be doing. I am sure that when the 41 days passes, if harm comes to the people of Ashraf, you will get people in political places who will say, well, we didn't have enough time. We started this 341 days ago, at least when I got involved, and you started this long before that. We have had enough time, but we have allowed the time to trickle through our fingers, and it is not acceptable. Mr. President, we need to act now, not just for the people in Ashraf, not just because we are wanting to stand up and have regime change in Iran. We need to act now because we are standing up for our own country when we stand up for the people in Ashraf. And if we fail to do that, we have not just being complicit in the murder of 3,500 people who we promised to defend, we are complicit in debasing our own country, and I do not believe that any American president ever should be part of that.
The mullahs who run the terrorist theocracy employ torture, rape, disfigurement, and murder to suppress dissent. Now they are planning the mass killing of the largest concentration of witnesses to their crimes in the world today, those who are living in Camp Ashraf in Iraq. There are movements afoot to bring the case against Iranian leaders in the International Criminal Court, as I've mentioned. Efforts are underway to try to persuade several nations that are signatories to the Rome Treaty to file charges, including incitement to genocide and the murder of dissidents. If this were to happen, the witnesses who currently reside in Camp Ashraf would secure the additional status of protected witnesses, and the prestige of the International Criminal Court might weigh heavily in favor of assuring that they were not harmed by Iranian killers assigned to keep them from giving relevant testimony. I intend to communicate directly to the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and urge him to grant witness-protected status to the potential witnesses who today are in that camp. Despite its claim to be complying with law, the Iraqi government is actively hindering UN agencies from trying to help the residents relocate to safe places. And now they're trying a new ploy. Now they're trying to get some UN agencies and some UN leaders to support the policies that they're trying to implement at Camp Ashraf. That is cynicism at its worst, and it cannot be allowed to succeed. The international community has too often failed in preventing the mass murder of dissidents. The world is now on notice. It has no excuse. When the Holocaust happened, everybody said, we didn't know. When the Armenian genocide occurred, we didn't know. When the Cambodian genocides were occurring, people were telling us it was propaganda. We didn't know. Rwanda, Darfur, we didn't know. We know. We have been told. We have been warned. So there's no time to wait. The clock of death is ticking. If not now, when?
Having worked for the past 10 years on trying to stop Iran's committed quest for a nuclear weapons capability at the White House, at the State Department, and now out of government, I am convinced that until the current repressive regime in Tehran is replaced through the resistance of the Iranian people, we will not permanently succeed in ending the nuclear program. I want to say that over the past few days, as I prepared my comments, and today as I have listened to the other speakers, I have learned a great deal about the MEK, which I had known before only as a source, perhaps the best source of information on Iran's nuclear program. And I can now say unequivocally that I am not only a supporter of delisting, but also of the other steps that Governor Ridge and others on the panel have put forth. Thank you very much.
The Obama administration has welcomed the IAEA findings and has declaimed the hypocrisy and outright lies of the regime's continuing denials. In my view, we must support the administration's continuing efforts to ratchet up sanctions and building consensus while walking the difficult line created by the harsh economic circumstances that confront us all today, and how those circumstances may be exacerbated by new sanctions. This process will require great skill and judgment. But in the end, we must not waver from using the great power that we possess to achieve the just ends we seek. Thank you very much.
Maliki, as we speak, is undermining his political opponents. He's driving key Sunni leaders out of the military, and he's consolidating his power base. The attack on Camp Ashraf is part of this strategy, with the Iranian fingerprints all over it. It is time to review our strategy for Iran against the harsh reality that, despite our rhetoric, attempts to negotiate, isolate, and sanction, the fact is the Iranians continue to use their proxies against United States interests and continue to pursue nuclear weapons. Therefore, one must conclude the obvious, that our policy has failed, and it has failed miserably.
It's certainly been a busy couple of months for the tyrants who govern Iran. As we've heard from a number of people, and as you are all too familiar, we see what Iran is doing in regard to Camp Ashraf with the MEK. You also know, and we heard from Ambassador Joseph and others, that last week the IAEA reported that Tehran has continued to work on a nuclear weapons program. But especially as the efforts of the current and the past U.S. administration to talk Iran out of its nuclear program founder, and amid the inspiring demand for freedom and on display across the Middle East, we have an opportunity to reconsider our approach and improve our policy, just as we have the opportunity now to reconsider our policy toward the MEK and Camp Ashraf. As Winston Churchill once reportedly remarked, quote, "Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they have exhausted all other possibilities." So now, I'd say, is the time for us to do the right thing on Iran policy and on Camp Ashraf. So with that, I thank you very much. Thank you for having me today.